The position of Alpine's Formula 1 boss and the fate of the team itself are uncertain in the wake of a key exit at the very top of Renault. Luca Di Maio, the architect of the Alpine F1 project, will step down as Renault Group CEO in July. Di Maio was responsible for hiring Flavio Briatore as his executive advisor, which really meant bringing the controversial ex-Benetton and Renault F1 boss back into the fold for a third stint running the Enstone team. That became very clear when team principal Oliver Oakes, who was hired after Briatore joined to be the public-facing part of team leadership, resigned suddenly in May, and Briatore assumed all remaining team principal responsibilities without taking on the title itself. But Di Maio's legacy is about more than just Briatore. Under his leadership, Renault rebranded its F1 team and Renault Sport programme entirely in the Alpine image. It has become an inconsistent, chaotic and so far very disappointing part of Renault's F1 history. Plus, it's usually been Di Maio's actions that have led to so much speculation about the future of the team and questions about whether Renault will just sell up. The argument against that has always been that Di Maio will never sell. But if Di Maio's leaving, what happens? Di Maio became CEO of the Renault Group in 2020 and initiated a plan to transform the fortunes of its various automotive brands, an overhaul dubbed Renaulution. A key part of that was producing new Alpine car models to make the niche brand a player in the electric vehicles market. To that end, the Renault Sport division was merged with Alpine to create a new business unit. Renault's F1 team was rebranded as Alpine as a result, as was the engine facility in Viry-Châtillon. Di Maio has been credited for a successful Renault tenure as the company now has a healthy foundation, boasts an impressive range of products, and has resumed growth. It said in a statement, while Di Maio himself said the results speak for themselves, they are the best in our history. But he has also essentially overseen a very poor part of its F1 history. The team has worked through leadership figures at an alarming rate, gradually gone backwards on track since its 2022 peak, and has actively abandoned its works team status. What is often referred to as Team Enstone in F1 deserves better. The Alpine era did include Enstone's first victory since Renault re-entered its works team in 2016, Esteban Ocon's fortunate win in the 2021 Hungarian Grand Prix. But overall, the last few years have been fraught with controversy, false dawns and instability. Di Maio has rejigged the Alpine cars and F1 leadership team on several occasions. Cyril Abiteboul, Marcin Budkowski, Otmar Safnauer, Bruno Famin and Oliver Oakes have all had stints as team principal. Laurent Rossi had an infamously divisive stint as CEO, and Flavio Briatore was brought in last June to be Di Maio's executive advisor. That led to Famin being repurposed within the group and Oakes being hired, and although Oakes resigned for personal reasons in May, it was known that there was at least some conflict over his limited responsibility, with Di Maio and Briatore really calling the shots. Last year, Di Maio, with Briatore by his side, greenlit the abolition of the Alpine F1 engine programme, meaning the team will forfeit work status at the end of 2025 to become a Mercedes customer. That's a move that probably will be a net gain for Alpine F1, but only because its engine division has underachieved ever since the 1.6 litre turbo hybrid engines were introduced in 2014. It's therefore also an admission of that failure. Di Maio's exit leaves Alpine vulnerable if there is not more support for the project among the Renault board, especially with how badly this year's going. It's a continuation of how Alpine has not only slipped back from its 2022 peak in this era of F1, but repeatedly undermined any notion of momentum or progress. Compared to its first few years as Renault, which includes the awful first year in 2016 when it had only just saved the team from its beleaguered Lotus era, Alpine's almost exactly the same in performance terms. It has almost the exact same average championship position, 6.2 compared to 5.8, despite a slight increase in the point scoring rate. Its progression has stagnated and it is incapable of breaking out of the midfield, and it would look even worse if Alpine hadn't rather fortuitously saved its 2024 season with a shock double podium in the wet in Brazil late in the year, which turned a likely 8th place in the championship into a more respectable 6th. This year might need an even more stunning turnaround though, as Alpine is last in the championship with just 11 points from 10 races. Positionally it is worse off, although points wise it's similarly bad to 2024. The problem is that rivals are getting better. This is exposing the limitations of the Alpine package badly. Overall it is quite competitive, 7th fastest on average and with some impressive peaks on circuits with medium and high speed corners. But the car's traction is poor and so is ride quality, probably even worse than last year, as evidenced by an awful Monaco weekend in which Alpine was the only team to be slower than it was in 2024. and the engine is lacking. Still underpowered and poor on energy recovery, this means the overall package is particularly weak on certain power-sensitive circuits and is especially vulnerable in races, which is a key part of why its reasonable one-lap pace is translating into points so rarely. There is a risk that the team also blames the power unit for all its ills, when there are clearly car problems as well. On top of all this, Alpine's deep in a driver crisis. It's well documented that former De Maio stooges like Laurent Rossi badly bungled the management of Oscar Piastri and let him jump ship to McLaren, where he is now leading the World Championship. Well played, Alpine. But having promoted its own junior Jack Doohan to a race seat for 2025 and given him his debut early in the 2024 season finale, Alpine looked set to lay that ghost to rest. Except Briatore ordered the signing of another team's junior, Franco Colapinto, over the winter, which ultimately led to Doohan being dropped after just 6 races this year. And Colapinto's yet to do much since replacing Doohan, with his own place far from secure. Doohan is still on Alpine's books, and it also has Formula 2 race winner Paul Aron in the fold. While Pierre Gasly is locked in for next year, this has left Alpine unsure what its driver lineup will be for the rest of 2025, let alone for 2026, and that's because Briatore's been allowed to run the team the only way he knows how, with tactics from a very different F1 of decades past. The muddled thinking on driver selection, along with the fact that Briatore appears to favour a get the band back together recruitment policy in those he's trying to bring in, means there are legitimate questions about whether the approach that served him so well in the 1990s and early 21st century is still the right one. Despite the on-track problems, Renault will know it still has a major asset simply by owning an F1 team, because right now, team values are at an all-time high, even the struggling ones. Renault owns 76% of the team, having sold the rest to a consortium of US investors in 2023. And it was widely felt in F1 that De Maio's desire to axe the engine programme was part of an effort to gradually make the team easier to offload, if not immediately, then in a few years' time. De Maio said it would never happen on his watch, and Briatore repeatedly denied it was on the cards too. Becoming an engine customer certainly made it cheaper and easier to justify the programme's existence, so could be argued it actually secured Alpine's F1 future, but nobody really bought that as a convincing argument. Plus, if you are intending to sell at a time when there's plenty of entities approaching teams and wanting to buy, you don't want to give the impression that you are an enthusiastic seller. Now, De Maio's impending departure from Renault creates 2 obvious, major questions for Alpine's F1 team. Will Renault's board and or its new boss consider a sale prudent given the significant increase in value the team has enjoyed, especially as its competitiveness on track is at an all-time low? Is now the time to cash in with a sale, whether it's another minority stake, a majority one, or Renault's entire share? And what happens to Briatore, given he was recruited by De Maio to advise him rather than taking on an official position within either the F1 team or Alpine and Renault as companies? Briatore's position has come under scrutiny in France, with a recent report claiming that his consultancy deal with De Maio earned him a significant percentage of commercial deals brought to Alpine, and a salary that outdid even De Maio's. It's unclear how Briatore is viewed by others within the Renault or Alpine corporate structure, because he was hired independently of it and exists independently of it. He is not a Renault or Alpine employee, and he's not a team staff member. Briatore was there because of and for De Maio, so with no tangible sign of progress in any meaningful metric since Briatore joined, and with De Maio soon to be out of the picture, Briatore's claim to Reuters that this changes nothing for him and the team feels a little too dismissive. In the short term, he's probably right, and it'll be business as usual. But how long will Briatore stay in charge? Will De Maio have the chance to greenlight any last-minute Briatore decisions, like a new team principal to finally replace Oaks? And what will De Maio's own successor as Renault CEO make of F1, the Alpine team, and who is in charge? They are critical questions to be answered, because it's no exaggeration to say this latest hierarchy shift could fundamentally change the future of Renault's F1 entry.